I watched a video by Pyro314 yesterday, which was a response to Cosmic Zen. I hadn't seen Cosmic Zen's original video, but it was something like 8 questions for something. It was a questions video anyway, which Pyro was responding to. If you watch this, Pyro, this isn't exactly a response to your video. It's a riff on it, if you like. And both some of the questions and some of the answers, provoked various things in me. And there was 2 particular questions which I think were kind of related, literally and poetically, and which stuck for me. One was this first one, which was, what is enlightenment to you? What does it mean? And this other one was, is it bright in the centre of the sun? Is there light in the centre of the sun? And I think they're kind of related, at least for me they are. So this first one, what is enlightenment? There's 2 enlightenments, I think, or there's 2 understandings of the term, which is why it gets confusing. And they are kind of related, but not directly. The first, as I think Pyro pointed out, was, it's a historical movement, a historical period, dating from the end of the 15th, 16th centuries to the present day, really, fading into other kinds of practices, other kinds of progressive practices. A period of increasing rationalism, increasing understanding of scientific methods, increasing understanding of post-Aristotelian logic, mathematization of science, the focus on the empirical method, evidence gathering, processes for testing evidence and getting interpersonal agreement over truths, those kind of things. So, a raft of progressive movements and political and social movements kind of accompanying that, which has brought us to where we are today. That's the Enlightenment. But I think it isn't just a social movement, though. It was also, I believe, I wouldn't want to say evolution because that takes it in the wrong area, but it did allow for different kinds of thinking, and I think changed the minds of what it is to be alive and awake, to be human. To be brought up in a society that went through the Enlightenment, and there's very few that didn't, is to have a different kind of mind. The modern mind is different to the medieval mind because it has different conceptual tools at its disposal, really important ones like the ones I've just mentioned. I'm just thinking of Thomas Huxley's essay that he wrote around the time of Darwin. Thomas Huxley was Darwin's bulldog. He wrote this essay, everyone is a scientist, and that's like 150 years ago. What he's meaning there is that, we all have the powers of induction and deduction and evidence gathering. We all use them every day, and always have, I guess, But the Enlightenment brings those powers front and centre and really adds them to your conceptual toolkit. So things like authority and truth and things like evidence and what it is to be convinced of something become very different under that rubric, really. And as I say, I think to the extent that it's impossible to grow up in a society these days, that's because we're all post-Enlightenment. To that regard, we're all enlightened. We're all able to. We all recognise the truth of that, and to all of us, it feels anachronistic, I think, to cede authority to other kinds of processes. We all kind of know, even if we go along with it, we all kind of know that authority doesn't just appear when someone makes a proclamation. You know what I mean? No one can just decide that pi is 3, which I think for some ancient cultures it was, in the relationship of the diameter of a circle to its circumference. You can't just decide arbitrarily it's 3. We all kind of know that. We know the truth is out there. It's not in the body or in the head of a monarch or a priest or a authority figure of any kind. So to that extent, we're all enlightened, I think. We might not know it. Although I suspect if some kind of 13th century peasant suddenly acquired this gift of what those things I just talked about, this conceptual toolkit that we've got, it probably would feel like a massive revelation. I think it probably would have felt like the lights going on. But because we're born with the lights on, sort of, or at least rays into the light quite early on, this light of this enlightenment, of the rational processes and respect for truth, as revealed through empirical methods, we don't get that weird revelation, that sense of, oh my God, yeah, of course. But it's there all the time, I think. I think it's in our being. So that's the first enlightenment. The second, actually that's the enlightenment that Kant talks about in that famous essay, Was ist Aufklärung? That's German accent. What is enlightenment? He's talking about that. The second enlightenment is one I've condemned and continue to condemn in some of these videos, although I have a slight change of mind after something I watched yesterday, which I'll tell you about in a sec, which is the enlightenment that you find, particularly something like the pages of that magazine that used to be called What is Enlightenment, which is now called Enlightennext, which is the organ of the Enlightennext organisation, which is Andrew Cohen's organisation. But other kinds of new agey kind of spiritual processes, all of which claim to be in touch with enlightenment. And I have a lot of problems with those, because they're talking about the feeling of enlightenment, really, I think. They're talking about the feeling of enlightenment, the feeling that I just mentioned 13th century peasants would probably have experienced if they'd suddenly gained access to Boolean logic and the scientific method. They're talking about that kind of sense, but it's all bound up with, well, I think archaic and hierarchical structures. You know what I mean? I mean, something like, just to step aside from Andrew Cohen for a second, I mean, something like spiral dynamics, which I know there are some people on YouTube who have a lot of respect for, and which I have almost no respect for. Sorry, it's just the way it is. Something like spiral dynamics, I mean, they are hierarchical. Ken Wilber's models are hierarchical. And you can bet that if you're in the presence of a hierarchy and you're talking to somebody who is talking about their spirituality in hierarchical terms, that they firmly believe that they are somewhere up the hierarchy, further up the hierarchy than you are. And I'm sure that's the case if anybody's watching this thinking, oh, that Freddie knows now about spiral dynamics. I bet if you look in your heart of hearts, what you're also thinking is, Fred is not as spiritually evolved as I am. And automatically I have a problem with that. And certainly I don't think anybody comes to spiral dynamics and thinks, oh yes, I really believe in this spiral dynamic stuff. There is this spirituality, there is enlightenment. I just don't have any of it at all. You know, it taps into that feeling that we all have, the feeling of revelation. You know, the 13th century peasant version of revelation, perhaps, but maybe others. That feeling of knowledge, that feeling of knowing. It taps into that and then kind of pats you on the back and tells you you've got some of it, and probably more of it than other people. So I have a problem with that. The experience I had yesterday, which hasn't rewritten my script, but to a certain extent has allowed me to reappraise that, is a video on Fora TV I watched yesterday. It's one of their live from the New York Public Library series, in which people are in conversation. It was a premium one, so I had to pay $4.95 for it, and I wouldn't recommend it because it wasn't that good. But it was interesting in a way. It was a conversation between the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, who I've got a lot of respect for. He's a very good popularizer, but a good scientist. And he was in conversation with Marina Abramovich, who's a performance artist specifically. And a lot of her work is kind of encounters. It's about encounters and what it is for one person to be in the presence of another, and what kinds of relationships and what kinds of definition of a self and other, and what is an I in that encounter, all those kind of things. She just finished a piece in New York where she was sat in a gallery space, perfectly motionless in a chair for 7 hours a day and 10 hours on Fridays. And there was a chair opposite her, and you had the opportunity to sit in that chair if you wanted to, and just kind of be in the presence of another human being for as long as you wanted. So she clocked up something like 700 and odd hours, just sitting perfectly motionless. I know it sounds really bogus when I describe it, but they are kind of powerful experiences, these, if you ever get the chance to do it. She's done a lot of that kind of work. Anyhow, she's in conversation with Antonio Damasio, and I thought, this is going to be great. Actually, my hand is bloody freezing. God, cold hand. Frosty day today. Anyhow, she's in conversation with Antonio Damasio. I should have been interested, because a lot of her work seems to be driven by ideas to do with the mind and consciousness, and obviously that's his bag. But it didn't really work. It wasn't a meeting of minds. You know, she came off as a complete dingbat, to be honest. she kept talking about consciousness, global and mineral consciousness, whatever the hell that is, and asking him to explain really kind of spurious paranormal events that she claimed to have happened to her, which sounded really naff to me. But so she didn't come out of it terribly well, I didn't think. And I think the reason why she didn't, sorry, I'm getting to enlightenment, I promise. The reason why I think she didn't is she kept trying to talk about her experiences in scientific terms. You know, she was trying to meet his science agenda, you know what I mean? And it wasn't working, because, as I say, it just came off as like bad science and crappy data and all that kind of stuff. But I can see why she might want to do that. And conversely, he was, it seemed to me, trying to make headway in terms of meeting her language, meeting the kinds of things that she would want to talk about. So he was talking about meditation, for example, and the brain states and mind states and experiences that accompany meditation, which she has some background in. And he came off slightly better in terms of, as I say, meeting the other person halfway and joining their discourse and fusing the way they talk about things. But one of the things he said in that, and this is where it gets to enlightenment, is he used the term enlightenment, and I've never heard him use that term before. He has used the term soul before, but again in a very specific way. But he used the term enlightenment, and he was talking about it in meditative terms, and he was relating it to the thesis of his new book, When Self Comes to Mind. And he was saying that what you do when you meditate, he was saying, one possible hypothesis for that, is that you're taking attention away from the outside world, you're taking attention away from the kind of sensory data that your body, the changing sensory data that your body is presenting. You referred to that firstly as the autobiographical self, that sense of who you are, and then approaching something you call the core self, or the nuclear self, where you're taking attention away from all the stuff that's changing about you. So the changing sensory data that you get every time you move your eyes around, and the changing auditory data that you get when you move past different things. Attention away from that, but also attention away from, we can't get through there for you, just go this way. Attention away from the kind of internal milieu that's constantly changing. You know, the feelings of, the emotions that's sweeping through your body. Taking your attention in beyond, you know, further in beyond that, he was saying, to some aspects of one's being, which he located physiologically in the brainstem, and processes which she's claiming are things that processes generate this feeling of a self. He says what you do eventually, if you strip enough stuff away, or you penetrate deep enough inside, you get to this core sense, just the feeling of I am awake. That's it, just the feeling of I am awake. He didn't put it in quite those terms, but this very, very basic sense that precedes any kind of content to that self. I am awake and I'm seeing. You know, it comes before the and I am. You know, which I thought was pretty interesting, really. And he identified that. He said, when you reach that, when you locate that sense of this is life, this is the life thing. This is what life feels like before its contents and before its journeys and processes and emotions and experiences and perceptions. This is what the feeling of life is. That, he says, is enlightenment. And he said it's very important. He didn't say why, but he said it's very important to gauge that and to gain access to it. And I really liked that. I'm not sure if Marina Abramovich entirely bought it, but I really liked that. So that I can relate to as an understanding of enlightenment. You know, as I say, what the value is, I don't know. And certainly from the small amounts of things like meditation practice and the stuff that I've done, I can kind of relate to that. You know, the feeling of just being alive and just being awake and nothing else. And potentially the other things that flow from that. Because of course one of the potential problems, but also nice experiences that flow from that, is that it can lead to other kinds of feelings like this absolute unity of being, you know. Sometimes it feels that if you do tap into that sense of there is just life, there is just this feeling of life, of being alive, there is just this feeling of being awake. As I say, that can lead to this sense of connectedness, absolute unity of being, you know, and before you know it you're into making physical claims about the way the universe works, which might not be accurate. And you're also, there's also the danger there of what I think Trunk Park calls spiritual materialism, you know, where you get kind of addicted almost to that feeling, because it feels incredibly real, you know. So you stop there and think, oh, this is what the real world is, and this is all it is, and it's great, and I'm fantastic, and I'm going to hang on to this, and it's mine, and I love it. And maybe I'll even sell it and make it proprietary product, and in a market the means to get to that. I think it has all that kind of trappings to it. So I think there's another pitfall there. But the experience itself is fine. I have no problem with calling that enlightenment. But you know, it's different to the Enlightenment movement of, you know, that 400 years of Enlightenment history I talked about beforehand, and that Kant sums up in Was ist Aufklärung. Now, how those two things connect is a different story. Actually, let me just see how long this video is, because I think I've been talking for ages. Shit, it's over 15 minutes. I'll keep talking, because although I've never tested it, I am a partner on YouTube now, so I may be able to launch a video that's slightly longer, but sorry if it's so long. Anyway, I'm going to see if I can draw those strands together and just talk about the inside of the sun. Actually, I don't know if I can draw them together. The inside of the sun, yeah, okay. The inside of the sun. The question is something like, is it bright inside the sun? Is it bright inside the sun? No, it's not bright inside the sun. Does that mean it's dark inside the sun? No, it doesn't mean it's dark inside. This is just my opinion. It doesn't mean it's dark inside the sun either. When you were responding to that, you were imagining dropping fireproof cameras in there and demonstrating how bright it was. And of course that's kind of accurate. But it's not bright, because in a sense it's a reworking of that old Zen thing to do with trees falling in forests, isn't it? If a tree falls in the forest when there's no ear to hear it, does it make a sound? No, it doesn't make a sound. Why doesn't it make a sound? Because sound, that thing we call sound, it's the name we give to the relationship between trees falling in forests and ears and auditory canals and eardrums and that whole system working together. That's what we call sound. You know, it would be an equivalent to saying, you know, does a camera take a photograph in the forest when there's no film in the camera? No, it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Because a photograph is a name we give to that gestalt created by cameras, forests, trees and film. You take the film out, there's no photograph. You take the ear out, there's no sound. By definition, it becomes a meaningless question. So the same thing I think applies to the centre of the sun. I'm not going to make statements about, you know, the chemical reactions and describe those kind of things and so on. But as soon as you're talking about words like light and words like bright, then you're talking about human evaluation, and you're talking about the system which incorporates the human into the mix. Right, okay. Is there a way of feeding that last bit into the first bit? I mean, certainly one of the projects of science, particularly kind of psychology and cognitive science over the last few years, I think, has been trying to get the subjective into the mix, hasn't it? The science of the subjective, as an article I mentioned in a video a couple of days ago. Science of the first person, you know, it's all over. Alva Noe, and it's all over these people, you know, that write about this kind of stuff. Consciousness studies is steeped in that kind of idea, and that kind of wish that we could get first-person perspectives into science somehow. And for me, it's an equivalent to try to combine these two understandings of the Enlightenment. You know, to try to find a way to talk about the world objectively, interpersonally, empirically, mathematically, logically, rationally, all those kinds of things, whilst at the same time trying to keep in mind that you have the that little spot of light in the brainstem. It might be irrelevant to keep that in mind, but you know, that there seems to be something going on there about that relationship. Maybe it's irrelevant for the same reason, you know, in the same way that it's kind of meaningless to say, is there light inside the sun? Well, it's kind of meaningless when you're talking in the terms, you know, because that whole language system is an externalizing, objectivizing language, it's kind of meaningless to say that. Perhaps for the same reason it's kind of meaningless to talk about the inner light in the brainstem, the little ticking of the nuclear self. Perhaps it's meaningless to talk about that in the same context as you're talking about social, scientific, political and human development.